For more than a decade, a stretch of land in northeastern Syria appeared to defy the Middle East's usual rules. Here, in what became known as Rojava, portraits of the Kurdish leader Abdullah Öcalan were raised, while officials spoke openly about grassroots democracy, gender equality, and ethnic pluralism. Behind this political experiment stood a formidable military force, the Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF. But as dramatic shifts shook Damascus and the Assad regime collapsed, the SDF found itself no longer fighting to expand, but fighting to survive. To understand the SDF, we have to go back to 2014. At the time, ISIS was swallowing cities across Iraq and Syria at terrifying speed. The group advanced all the way to the outskirts of Kobani, a Kurdish border town facing Turkey. There, Kurdish fighters, then operating under the name People's Protection Units, YPG, waged a desperate house-to-house battle. Washington saw something crucial in this resistance, an opportunity. The United States was trapped in a familiar dilemma. It needed a capable local partner with discipline, ideology, and organizational cohesion to confront ISIS without sending tens of thousands of American troops into yet another Middle Eastern quagmire. After failed attempts to arm and train other factions, the Kurdish fighters emerged as the most reliable and disciplined force on the ground. Out of this mutual necessity, American air power began reshaping the battlefield, dropping weapons, providing intelligence, and delivering intense air support. What began as an emergency partnership soon evolved into a strategic alliance that would redraw Syria's map. This was the true founding moment. From the fires of Kobani, the Kurdish units ceased to be a local militia defending a single city. They became the preferred ground partner of the most powerful military on Earth. In 2015, under direct pressure from Washington, a new military entity was born, the Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF. This was not a simple rebranding exercise. It was a geopolitical necessity aimed at resolving a dangerous diplomatic dilemma. Turkey, a key NATO member, views the YPG as nothing more than a Syrian extension of the PKK, an organization Ankara designates as terrorist and has fought for decades. The American solution was to fold Kurdish fighters into a broader coalition that included Arab tribal factions, Syriac units, and Turkmen groups. The goal was clear: to give the force a Syrian national character, easing Turkish anger and reassuring the international community that this was not merely a Kurdish separatist project. But beneath this multi-ethnic facade, the reality on the ground remained unchanged. Real leadership, organizational capacity, and military decision-making stayed firmly in Kurdish hands. This fragile balance between a pluralistic image and Kurdish dominance enabled the SDF to take control of nearly one-third of Syria's territory. In practice, the SDF evolved into something resembling a state within a state. By controlling the wealth of eastern Syria, the group achieved a level of financial autonomy that allowed it to fund its administration and military independent of Damascus. But this ambitious project, despite its apparent strength, rested on shaky foundations, relying entirely on two extremely fragile pillars. The first was the American insurance policy. Though U.S. troop numbers never exceeded a few hundred soldiers, their presence functioned as a symbolic red line, deterring Turkish armor, Assad-aligned militias, and even Russian air power from advancing. These troops were the only barrier preventing the region from being swallowed outright. The second pillar was the political vacuum left by war. For years, the SDF benefited from Assad's preoccupation with battles in Aleppo, Idlib, and the outskirts of Damascus, and from ISIS's status as a global threat that granted the SDF international legitimacy as a security necessity. As long as everyone was busy fighting other fires, the SDF remained safe. But that safety was never the result of lasting political recognition. it was merely a temporary ceasefire in an unresolved conflict. For Ankara, an armed Kurdish entity on its southern border is an existential threat. Turkey did not stop at diplomatic protests. It launched 3 major military operations, Euphrates Shield, Olive Branch, and Peace Spring, to carve out SDF-held territory and establish a safe zone. This exposed a profound contradiction. The United States supports the SDF while Turkey attacks it. That contradiction kept the SDF in constant fear of American abandonment, a fear partially realized in 2019 when President Trump abruptly withdrew U.S. forces from border areas, clearing the path for Turkish tanks. The Kurdish leadership always understood that American support was conditional and mission-specific. Survival meant mastering the gray zones of war. Publicly, the SDF aligned with Washington as a counter-terrorism partner, securing air cover and funding. Privately, it kept channels open with Damascus and carefully avoided direct confrontation with Russian forces on the ground. The gamble was simple: that conflicting interests among global and regional powers would guarantee its survival. That delicate balance collapsed overnight. The political earthquake that struck Syria in late 2024 and early 2025, marked by the sudden fall of the Assad regime, erased the old rules entirely. The SDF found itself facing a far harsher reality, shaped by 2 opposing forces. On one side stood the armed Syrian opposition, now the dominant power after capturing Aleppo and Damascus. Closely aligned with Turkey, these factions view the SDF not as a Syrian actor, but as a separatist project threatening national unity, one that must be dismantled militarily and politically. On the other side loomed an old familiar threat: ISIS. As security collapsed following the fall of centralized authority, the group began reorganizing in Syria's desert regions. Here lies the SDF's tragic paradox. It had long believed that the resurgence of ISIS would be its final card, the leverage that would force Western capitals to cling to it as an indispensable security partner. But that card lost its shine faster than expected. Once the new government in Damascus stabilized, it moved swiftly to announce its formal entry into the international anti-ISIS coalition, presenting itself as a legitimate, sovereign alternative capable of securing borders and combating terrorism. That move pulled the rug out from under the SDF. If the Syrian state itself could coordinate with Washington, what need remained for a parallel military entity east of the Euphrates? Political pressure soon gave way to diplomatic deadlock. Early talks aimed at integrating the SDF into the new Syrian army stalled, not over military logistics, but ideology. The new government rejected any form of Kurdish autonomy that might undermine state sovereignty. The SDF leadership, in turn, refused to surrender the political and military independence it had built over a decade. Then came the recent events in Aleppo, the final blow to hopes of compromise. The rapid takeover by forces loyal to the new regime exposed a stark imbalance of power and laid bare the SDF's military vulnerability. Trust evaporated. Diplomacy lost credibility. Today, the SDF faces its moment of truth. The gray zones that sustained it for a decade have disappeared. With the new regime seizing the anti-ISIS narrative and international recognition, the Kurdish leadership is left with 3 grim paths, none of them easy. Forced military integration, dissolving completely into the new Syrian army, an ideological suicide that would erase the autonomous project built over 10 years. Suicidal confrontation, an open war against the Syrian state and Turkey, likely ending in total territorial loss and the collapse of remaining influence. Limited settlement, trading military presence for symbolic cultural rights, surrendering heavy weapons and control of oil and wheat to Damascus in exchange for security guarantees and limited local administration. In the end, the ultimate question remains: will the United States intervene at the last moment to save its most loyal ground partner? Or will Washington close this chapter, as it has before, leaving the SDF to face its fate alone? Bringing back an old Kurdish proverb, "The Kurds have no friends but the mountains." And if you'd like to dive deeper into how this story began and understand the full historical roots of the Kurdish question in Syria, should we make a dedicated video tracing that history from the beginning until today? Tell us in the comments.